Welcome. It is Wednesday, and you are watching Direct Line Live. Our special guest tonight is Jay Townsend, president of the Townsend Group, political consultant from the great state of New York. Welcome, Jay. Our hosts tonight are Mark Unkefer and Jackie Saxby. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Dwight. Do you think he knows we can still see him? Up there he goes. Jay, thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's going to be a great show because we got two New Yorkers and the offspring of two New Yorkers. So it's going to be a very loud conversation, I'm sure. And everyone's going to want to have their voices heard. So I'm excited to talk about it. So Jay, the first thing that I want to know, and we're talking about this a little before the show, is how do you become a political consultant? Where do you wake up and say, this is what I want to do? I want to help candidates. Not I want to be the candidate. I want to help candidates.
I'm going to start this by saying I'm one of the luckiest people you will ever meet, because I knew what I wanted to do when I was 17 years old. I'm sure that some things that happened before that, the fact that my father was in politics, the fact that I did door-to-door work for him in first grade, the fact that he was a voracious reader and expected me to be probably had something to do with it. But here's the truth about people who are in politics, and true of candidates: they are not normal people. Normal people do not do that. Normal people don't get involved. Normal people don't run for office. And generally what happens is during the course of someone's life, they see a problem and it dawns on them that it could be fixed by changing a law or changing the way things are done or by passing a certain kind of bill. And they get involved with a candidate who is for that cause, or a candidate wakes up someday and says, I'm so sick of this, I'm going to do something about it. And they run and it just hits them. But somewhere along the line, people who are in politics somehow get bitten by a political bug. Once you've been bitten by that bug, you never lose it. I was bitten early. But usually it's a place where young people who were full of passion and energy and want to make change or make society better or do something for their jurisdiction, that's where it comes from. Now, you just said it. Not everybody can be a good candidate. And I've seen candidates that start out thinking they wanted to be a candidate, but learned that they could be just as effective by helping people behind the scenes. And in fact, being a candidate's a full-time job, but you can help several candidates behind the scenes, just devoting your time to helping them disseminate their message or create their message. I don't think there's any one. I mean, I never studied in high school anything about becoming a political consultant. There was no college course I ever took for that. I guess there's some how to become the School of Campaign Management in Washington for people who've decided, okay, I want some academic training for this. But there's no way of predicting who this hits or how it hits them. It just happens.
So if I could, one of the things that I think separates political consultants is they all sort of start frequently, they kind of are the entry door, if you will, for a candidate who comes to them and says, I'd like to run for office. People are told I need a consultant. What do I need to do in order to get started? And what I was really impressed with, and again, you've got some great videos that are available. Obviously, you also have the website. Is you do a great job of breaking down the process and asking kind of a structured set of questions to candidates to think about. Can you kind of summarize kind of what those elements are?
I'm going to talk about people who make great candidates and people that I know within a few minutes are not going to make it. This is the genesis. If when someone's running for office, they're auditioning to voters for the power that affects their lives. all elected officials have some degree of power, even if it's just hiring staff that serves the public, like a county clerk. And if you're asking voters for power, you should have an answer for voters when they ask, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to do with this power? Candidates who have a good answer to that generally make pretty good candidates. And candidates who do not, you got to be very careful of them, because if they don't know why they're doing it, then they're not running to fix a problem. They're running for some other reason. There are those who get into politics to make money. There are those who get into politics because they love the attention. But usually they end up in the dustbin of history because they seldom accomplish much, or they become a public nuisance. So it's one of the first questions I ask anyone who calls me is, tell me about some of the reasons that you want to run for office. What do you want to do? What's your agenda? And it could be, what wrong do you want to right? It could be, how do you want to improve the quality of life of people in your jurisdiction? It could be, what injustice do you want to correct? And usually people who call me have a pretty good answer to one of those questions. They may not always articulate that answer well, but you can fix that with a little training. So I think authentically, if you're running for office, you should have a good reason for asking for the power to govern the way people live.
You also talk about some of the other elements about what goes into that. I like the way you describe it. You talk about the moral code for it. Mm-hmm. So beyond just what are the issues are, is the issues of character that go into that. So kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's this. Every terrible temptation you could ever face, you will face in politics. The system will tempt you to bend your moral code. It will. All right. A big contributor of yours said, I sure would appreciate a vote on this bill. And you're tempted to vote for it because the contributor wanted it, but you know it's not a good thing for your constituents. That's a temptation. And then it gets down to, well, if I vote for this, will anybody notice? Is any slop going to fall back on my shoes if I get caught doing this? So there are always 4 pressure points in a political campaign that one way or another end up bending someone's moral code, or at least the temptation. One is, there's always pressure from the press to do something or talk about something or pay attention to this problem as opposed to that problem. And they buy ink by the barrel, or they have unfettered access to the airwaves. That's a pressure point. There are people who give money to campaigns. They are a pressure point in a political campaign, because if a candidate does something that really alienates a big base of their contributors, it gives them pause before they do that. Special interest groups are a pressure point. And candidates constantly, I remember in working for members of Congress, and I'd say, oh my God, Jay, help me figure this one out. I got so-and-so that's for this bill. I got so-and-so that's against this bill. Both of them supported me in the last campaign. Tell me what to do. I've had more than one conversation like that. And ultimately, the pressure point is the voters. Right. They have the final say here. So my point here is, you legislate, as you offer amendments, as you trade votes on the floor of Congress or what have you, you're always going to be tempted to bend your moral code. Not to mention that most members of Congress, after they've been there a while, want to stay. That's when they lose their passion and their bullish approach to fixing a problem. It's, gee, why do I need to upset people? I got a safe district now. Everybody's happy with me. I don't want to rock the boat, so I don't need to lead much anymore. I'm just going along to get along. That, in Seth, is bending your moral code. So what I tell people early on is, if you don't set some parameters here, you're going to do something someday that will make you ashamed when you look in the mirror, and life is too short to be ashamed at what you see. So set your boundaries and say, there are certain things I will not do. Then at least you can live with yourself.
Have you found, I guess, specifically on the federal level, looking at the people in office right now, that they very much bent to those moral codes? Not necessarily, I mean, you have plenty who are going along to get along, but those who are not really seeing that they answer to their constituents, their voters, so much as they vote to, they bow to the big interest donors who donate to their campaigns.
I think there's some of that. Of course there is. It's all the time, because the money's precious and nobody ever has too much money. All right. So that's part of it. There was a fellow I worked for. I think he had a lot to do with my approach to this. I remember once I was employed by a U.S. senator. He was a Democrat, represented the state of Indiana, a very prominent senator. In the Democrats had a really bad election year in 1978, and some Democrats lost. And they lost because there was a conservative movement forming back in that time. And I remember he called a few of us into his office after that, and he said, I know some of you are going to tell me I need to change my tune, that I need to stop voting for some of this stuff, and that I got to sing a different song when I go back to Indiana. And he says, I just want to tell you all right now, I'm not selling my soul to stay here. I came here to fight for certain things. I don't want to hear that I have to change my stripes. Don't try and even talk to me that way, because what's the point of me being here if I can't fight for what I believe? A man, I wanted to kiss his feet. That, to me, in his view of public life, was, I am here to lead. If I see there's something that needs to be done, even if I'm ahead of the electorate that I'm representing, I have an obligation to lead the charge. They'll catch up with me, but I'm here to lead. That was his view of public life. He lasted 18 years in the Senate, which is not bad for a Democrat from Indiana.
And I believe that was Birch Bayh.
It was, yeah.
Yep. Let me just
his trivia for the
I'm
day.
sorry, I had to go, and I'm going to have to launch into a partisan thing, because there used to be a saying in Indiana politics that there was two senators buy and bought, but we won't.
That was when Vance Harkey was.
Yes, we won't. We won't. See, I was hoping you weren't going to actually point out that it was Vance Harkey who was the other half of that.
Yeah.
Who was the senator who lost in 78. Let's kind of shift gears from this. This is a bit of it probably conforms with a lot of the worst feelings that people have about politics. Mm-hmm. Frequently, you've got candidates who you've recruited for office, and maybe it's an uphill race to kind of, that would be the most generous thing you could say about it. Mm-hmm. One of your videos is focused on how to run for office with no money. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was kind of an interesting take. And you really do have some very good suggestions on that. You want to elaborate on that?
Well, we are in an age where it's easier to do that now than it was 50 years ago. All right. Now, you got to have a different kind of look here, but let's talk about social media. And here's the truth. A great message will overcome an opponent who has more money. Now, sure, when I say no money, Uh, yeah, I mean, come on. If you got volunteers out walking around, somebody ought to buy them pizza and beer when they come back and they've worked all day out in the hot sun. So no money is relative, but let's just say a small amount of money. So it is very hard to run for Congress with no money. I don't know anybody who knows how to do that. But certainly you can run for city council, you can run for a local office, you can run for school board without a lot of money. It just takes a lot of adept social media, it takes shoe leather, and it takes elbow grease. I have seen it done. If you really are passionate about a cause and you don't have a lot of money, why, get yourself some flyers, have a friend print them off, and start going door to door. It works magic. And there are a lot of candidates who've started that way. They win a local office by going and talking to voters. They surprise people when they win. They start leading, they start making a difference, and they become prominent. And pretty soon there are people with money saying, you need to run for the assembly or the state legislature or what have you. That is a route into politics. So it can be done, but you can't run in a place where you got 1 million voters to speak to and expect that you can win with no funding, unless you got some sugar daddy at a super PAC somewhere.
But you did start talking about the role of being able to do door to door and just meeting voters. And that really is for races of a particular size. That's just the best route to do it, whether you have a lot of money or a little money. True. Meeting the voters is absolutely essential, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yes. And it's, here's a practical matter. I've got a race going on somewhere where we got a pool of 30,000 voters. He's going door to door, but he ain't going to meet 30,000 people. You just can't. So we have to advertise in addition to him going door to door. Now, there's also what I call strategic door to door. It was something we did a few years ago, and I had a candidate who'd never run before. And he says, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And I said, well, we're 6 months before the election. I'm going to give you a list of doors to knock on, and I'd like you to knock on them first. And I talked to him about how to talk to people when he met them, how to be a good listener, how to be totally polite. Every time he met someone, he'd sit there and send them a handwritten note, thanking them for their time with his cell phone number to be in touch. He did it. But once he'd knocked on the first 1,000 doors, he says, who was on that list? And I said, they were people who have voted in 4 of the last 4 Republican primaries. He says, oh my God, I met so many influential people in the party and everything else. I said, that's why I gave you that list. These people talk. These people are connected. That's who I wanted you to meet first. Well, he kept doing it, but the truth is, by doing it that way, he had the nomination won before any votes were cast, because he had the entire network of influential people in that town in his corner before his opponents ever figured out what he'd done. Right. So that was strategic door to door.
So, oh, go ahead.
Well, if you're doing a door to door campaign, start with the ones who are habitual voters, knock on those first, and then circle back to get the 1 out of the 4s or the 2 out of 4s later. Because the 4 out of 4s are engaged.
So what advice do you have, especially in a state like Maryland? This is something that's very prominent for most of our candidates, especially in the county where Mark Dwight and I are, is what's your advice for candidates who are fighting some of these uphill battle races for these seats at any level?
Be realistic. Look, whether a candidate can win an election or not is immaterial to me. I don't care. I will work for somebody that's in a lopsided district because I like them. So You have to be realistic. If you're a Republican running in a district where it's 65D and 35R, the cards are stacked against you. All right. So ask yourself this, and I do ask candidates this. Let's suppose you run and come up short. What's your consolation prize? What do you want out of the effort that you're going to make to do this? Sometimes I don't know. And I said, well, if you run and come up short, what you never want to happen is losing twice on the same day. Mm-hmm. I said, how do you lose twice? It's when you run and you lose because you didn't stand for anything important. So use the platform and the podium that you're going to have during the campaign to ignite a movement or advance a cause that is very important to you or important to the people in that jurisdiction, because that gives you an afterlife, even in defeat your first time. If you can build a group of people who absolutely love your passion to fix this problem, you will have a future. If you lose because you just mimicked what your opponent was saying, you've lost twice. You didn't stand for anything important.
Although I think we probably could point to lots of examples of people who became successful, but lost their first campaign, maybe even lost their second campaign, but stuck to it. And one of the things they get out of a campaign is kind of learning, the learning curve, if you will, of being much more effective politicians.
True. Gingrich ran 3 times, I think, for Congress before he finally won his seat. So this goes back to something fundamental. I think your audience might be helpful to know. Anytime you walk into a room as a candidate and sit down at the table, there are a certain number of chips that you bring with you. And the analogy is you can play poker at some hotels in Las Vegas for $5. That's the entry fee. But if you want to go to the top floor with the big wigs, the entry fee is $5 million worth of chips before you even sit at the table.
Right.
Politics is like that. So what are the chips that candidates bring to the table in an election? One is name recognition. That's a chip that has value. One is deep pockets. That has value. I mean, Mike Bloomberg was taken seriously the day he said, I think I'm going to run for mayor. Why? Because he had billions sitting in his back pocket and was willing to spend some of it. It is a rock hard constituency among a certain block of primary voters that makes you a credible candidate. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if Bernie Sanders woke up tomorrow and says, I'm going to run against Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders is immediately a serious candidate because he has a rock solid following among younger Democrat primary voters. So there is name recognition, there is money, it's a rock hard constituency. A couple of others that can make a difference. One is a network of influential people. So let's go back to that fellow I was talking about that did all that door-to-door work. Well, those people he ran into on his first round was the town chairman of the Republican Party. It was the head of the Chamber of Commerce. Every influential position, the doctors, the lawyers that were kind of the backbone of the party there, well, those were people who had influence. Those were people who had money. Those were people who had a contact list full of names of other influential people. And that's kind of, he didn't have any advertising to speak of until 2 months before the election. But what he did have is his own contact list full of these influential people who were already sold on him. Those were the chips he brought to the table. So if you have none of these chips, it leaves you with only one. which is the words that come out of your mouth. That is also a chip. A really dynamic, well-rehearsed speaker who knows how to wind up a crowd and get people out of their seats. That is a chip that a lot of candidates do not have. That and that alone can carry you in a smaller jurisdiction, but it can't carry you in a congressional race without money as well. So that's what I tell candidates. So you start, a lot of them who come to me haven't run before. And I said, well, let's talk about what you're for in this campaign. Well, let's talk about how you say that. And I help them build this chip called their message. When the message clicks, they begin to take off.
So how do you recommend candidates formulate that message? What goes into kind of developing that elevator speech? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, let's start about what problem do you want to solve? Man, if you don't have an idea what problem you want to solve, what are you running for? Why do you want the job? What are you going to do with this job if you get it? I'd be very leery of any candidate who didn't have an answer to that question. What are you running for? So now, not everybody has a full inventory of problems, and some people have very general answers to that. Well, I want to fix education. Well, I want to fix the crime problem. All right. Okay. Let's dig into that and let's figure out how you're going to do that. It will come up with a compelling message. But it starts with somebody who has a passion to fix something that needs to be fixed.
You've talked about sort of expanding from the message, the elements that go into coming up with a good stump speech. And that's, I think, obviously we've heard that, and actually some of them, I think, Jackie, we can, at this point, we can give the stump speech because we've heard it so often from a good candidate, right? Yes. But obviously at the outset, they've got to put pen to paper and develop that. Well, how do you counsel people for coming up with that?
Usually I write the stump speech for them.
Okay, that's one way to do it. Yes.
Based upon information they give to me in our conversations. Now, with any first-time candidate that I have, our first Zoom call is devoted to me getting to know them. I ask them to take me through their entire life history. In part because I know I'm going to write this speech for them. And I want to hear good days, bad days, tragedies, the times they had to crawl through broken glass, what moved them. And I sometimes I even figure out what their real motivation is by what they tell me. They just didn't know it. So when it's time to write the stump speech, I kind of outline 5 different areas that I'm going to include in that. One is, do they really have a compelling story to tell? And sometimes they really do. Now, story is not your bio. Story is an event or an experience in your life that profoundly altered your point of view or the way you think or the way you behave. We all have stories like that. Our life is a product of episodes like that. So I'll give you one example. It was the first conversation. It was amazing. So the first question I asked this candidate in a phone call is, what's the earliest experience you ever had that you can remember? And he laughed. He says, well, yeah, I was 2 years old and there was cold water running over my butt. I said, okay. He said, why was cold water on your butt? Well, I was swimming across the Mekong River. Why were you swimming across the Mekong River? He said my dad had sided with the communists in Laos during the Vietnam War. No, my father had sided with the Americans. And when the communists took over Laos, they were killing anybody who had sided with the Americans. My father was on their hit list. So he got us out of bed one night. He walked away, left his farm behind, all the cattle. And we walked through the jungle for 3 days through Laos until we got to the Mekong River. And he tied us all up with a rope, and he put plastic bags, blew them up with air, and tied them to our necks so we wouldn't drown. And we got across the Mekong River to a refugee camp in Thailand. I said, that's why you're going across the river? He said, yeah. I said, what happened then? He said, we lived in the refugee camp for 7 years. And then one day some guy came around, and he looked at my dad and said, would you and your family like to go to America? And of course he did. And I remember my first day in America. It was the first time I ever saw a toilet flush. It was my first taste of Coke, my first car ride, and I threw up all over my mama in the back seat. And I said, okay, cool. This is a really interesting story. Can you tell me how it might relate to your campaign? He said, Jay, everything I have and everything I own, my college degree, my family, my business, everything I owe to the United States of America. I'm running for office because I want to fix this democracy because I'm afraid it's going to fall apart. Oh my God, the chills that I got when he said that. I knew then I had a compelling story. That story went at the front end of his stump speech because it's such an engrossing story and so moving that when he tells that story at the beginning of a speech, he's got the crowd in his hands. They're into every word he's saying. So that's part of a speech. And if you got a compelling story like that, that is a great way to start a stump speech. If you tell a story that changes the way people feel, they will never forget you. So second element, stump speech has to have a little bit about the things that you regard as serious problems that need to be fixed, and a few reasons why, and if you got the space for it, how you're going to do it. Third element of a good stump speech, you have to say things that let people know a little bit about your moral code and what makes you tick. Because they need to know that your values are in sync with theirs. And if you don't say a few words that lets them know that, they're going to leave the room wondering what your value system is. Right? The fourth element I would throw in, most people, voters, do not care about your bio, but they would like to know that you got your feet on the ground. So I always devote at least a paragraph, maybe a paragraph and a half of biographical information. Maybe he's a husband, he's a father, he's a small business owner, he's volunteered to these civic and community organizations. He's done this in his spare time, just to let the audience know that, yeah, he's qualified to do this job. And depending on the state of the campaign, there's one final element. It's what I call the unique selling proposition. You use this in a multi-candidate field. What can you say in a speech about yourself or why you're running that no other candidate can say or will say? If you're running in a one-on-one race, what can you highlight toward the end of your speech that makes this an easily understood contrast? One white, one black, one pepper, one salt, as you frame the choices that voters face. Now, the art of this is packing all of that into a speech that's 5 to 10 minutes long. It does take time to do that. Most candidates have no idea how to do that, which is why they bring me on to help them. But that's the stump speech. Now, oddly enough, if you write a good stump speech, you can condense that stump speech down into a pretty compelling 2-minute video, because in a video you have footage to help you carry the words you're saying. That is also an art. But if you're saying something substantive in a 2-minute video that really takes people on a journey, they'll watch it all the way to the end. And if they really like it, they'll share it.
So I'm a marketing background. So, tying all that in, the videos, the stump speeches, what have you seen progress or change, obviously with the influence of social media and things like that, with how you recommend people market for a particular race? I know obviously it very much depends if it's a rural environment versus an urban environment, but what are you recommending to people in terms of what channels they should be focusing on?
I mean, social media channels?
Or just in general, out of home, social media, radio, TV.
Yeah. Everything now starts with social media. It's a place to build a contributor base. It's a place to build a network of people that are for you, that become volunteers and contributors and so on. So, I mean, Facebook is still a must. Instagram in a race is still a must. Twitter can be very useful to certain candidates because journalists hang around Twitter or X or whatever we want to call it now. If you've got younger voters in your jurisdiction that you need to reach, they're on TikTok. Now, I may leave. The next one is YouTube. Those 5 are my go-to outlets for social media. We use them all differently because none of them have quite the same audience. YouTube is video and Facebook is more static than video, although you can do short ones in Facebook and they'll watch them. Now, the demographics, the hot demographic, as far as I'm concerned, on YouTube is people who are under the age of 65. YouTube came of age during their lifetime. Your older seniors have not, they're still with Facebook. So you don't run the same kind of campaign on all of those, but you use those channels to disseminate specialized information to certain people. So now, beyond that, then the question becomes, okay, you're there. Now, what is the most efficient way for me to disseminate the message to the people who need to hear my message that might vote for me? That is just a math thing. Oh, you got 1,000 voters in your jurisdiction? We're going to print some few palm cards and you're going to go door to door. That's the way we're going to do it here. If you're running for governor of Georgia, man, if you're not on commercial television, you're not there. That's the most efficient way to reach people in the state of Georgia in a statewide election. That has to come first.
It's interesting. Over the years, it seems that the media that is most effective is changed. So there was a time not so long ago when budgets would typically go overwhelmingly for television. 80 to 90% would be in television. Social media has changed and cut that, and I think most campaigns will now spend more on social media than on television. But I'm thinking, I think we talked before about robocalls. I think it's fair to say they've lost their effectiveness because they're just blocked by spam and what have you. I wonder these days whether text messaging is reaching that point where it used to be there was some novelty, and now people are screening that out.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about how to adapt to what's the best way, most effective, most current way to be able to reach people?
Well, good question. We face this dilemma in a campaign I'm involved with now. All right. We've got 15, 20,000 people we're trying to reach in this jurisdiction. The universal way to get a message at them at roughly the same time and know exactly who's going to see it is a piece of mail. Now, if you really want them to look at it, it's really got to be well designed. It has to have a substantive message. All right. So here's what we'll do. We got a mail piece going out today. Friday, it's going to start to hit. That's when I'll come in with the text messaging and the emails and the robocalls that reinforces the mail piece, because then I've hit him twice with his name. And that may increase the readership of the mail, but that's the way I'll gear it. But I would not in isolation just started sending out text messages in an area where they know nothing about him, because it pisses them off.
Yep.
And I'm skittish about doing blanket emails without anything else going on, because you either get a lot of drop off or unsubscribes, or worst case scenario, too many people complain.
Right.
And the next thing you know, you're gone from MailChimp.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way it is right now, but God Almighty, this changes. And this is the thing about our technology. What's working today may not work in 2 years. Where the hell was TikTok 5 years ago? Right?
One other thing I want to cover before we have to wrap up is the other thing that's presented a big challenge. And it's interesting how it's come full circle that we're back to mailers being probably one of the most effective, because no one really gets mail anymore. So it stands out, is the advent of the Ring doorbell. So what we've been finding is people going out knocking doors, and you got someone answering from the camera from their phone. They're like, I'm not coming to the door. I don't know you.
Yeah, running into that. You can't go door to door after dark anymore.
Yeah, that's for sure.
They'll call the police. So what we try and do, if we're doing door to door during the day, well, we just concentrate on the seniors, because they're most likely to be home. And
to even want to talk to you, even, if you knock on someone's door on a Saturday, most of them, if they have the Ring, they're like, I don't want to talk to you. Leave whatever it is on the door and go.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to resort to that. So yeah, the people are becoming more resistant to it. They got a brick wall up sometimes. I don't want to hear any ads today. I don't want to talk to any people. Can't do much about it except put the flyer in their door.
So Jay, we've been putting under the crawler ways to contact you. I certainly recommend you folks take a look at your YouTube page channel. There's a lot of content there, but what else do you want to, how else can we reach out to, how potential candidates and people who are running campaigns reach out to you?
The best way is on my YouTube channel. There you can email me, you can call me. That's the quickest way to do. But I'm not saying go to my YouTube channel for that. I say go to my YouTube channel to learn something. And no matter what video you're watching, I tell you how to get a hold of me. And it's obvious. But this is my contribution to the next generation of leaders. Is I just decided it a few years ago, I'm going to dump what I know, and I'm going to put it on YouTube, and I'm going to let people benefit from it. And I can tell from the feedback I get from people that it's become an important resource to people who want to get into politics. So have at it.
Well, thank you very much. And I do recommend taking a look at that. So Jackie, where are we headed now for dinner?
Oh, we got to go to Masoni's, man. Get some pasta. My one quick plug for the evening before we close out is on March 9th, the Frederick County Young Republicans are hosting Congresswoman Kat Cammack for a dinner. She's a young Republican congresswoman. She's one of my favorites. And quite frankly, I don't know how anyone convinces a congresswoman to stick around on a Saturday to do a dinner when they could be going back home to Florida. So it's going to be something special. So definitely reach out to the Frederick County Young Republicans to get tickets. It's going to be a great event. And Jay, thank you so much for joining us. We'll definitely have to have you back. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm excited to share that with my friends and colleagues. And Mark, as always, thank you for bringing your insightful questions and for hosting with me. And to all of you, we'll be back for our Lonely People on Valentine's Day special next week. I'll be here.
We'll
Mark,
actually be having Jim Gilmore, former ambassador, former governor of Virginia, and also
dating horror stories.
Well, and also a former member of the Reagan National Security Council, who also was my advisor at George Washington. But it will be Henry Now, who's written on conservative internationalism and is a very thoughtful leader. So it'll be a great show a week from now. Yeah,
great way to end a nice romantic evening with your loved ones is with Direct Line.
Okay.
So we'll see you all next week.
Thanks. You very much.